Hello, welcome everyone. It's nice to see you all. So we are here today for a Taos conversation with Gail Simon, Amanda Middleton, and Liz Day. So we're so glad that we were able to join us. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. And we encourage you to have your video on so that we can see each other. And we are here for an hour together, and I will very quickly pass it on to our hosts today. Thank you so much for hosting this conversation, Gail, Amanda, and Liz. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's lovely to be here and to extend, I guess, the intention of the letter, which was to get us talking and thinking. Maybe Gail and Liz, you can say a little bit more about that.
Liz, do you want to say something?
Well, just that I'm really pleased to be here and be part of this discussion and see where it goes.
The idea of the letter isn't that we are the authors who are going to put some orchid ID or something like that. It's not about us feeling any sense of ownership, which isn't this of a single document, as though it's a fixed thing. This is a document that gave rise, that emerged out of conversations, and we think we'll find life in other conversations, in other places, that it has a life of its own and will morph and change, be rewritten, kept in sacred places. We have no idea, and we have only an investment in dialogue, in people speaking from within lived experience. We've had a situation in the last week in the UK where somebody upset a lot of people by writing from an aboutness position. And this is a tricky thing. I think we're in an era where part of our intention to review our practice, review our theories, actually, where our stories come from. Part of our commitment in this era is to think who made up those theories. And theories, of course, are stories. Who made up those theories and what power have they had? Who's been inclined to enact them? I remember when I was a young social worker, when I say young, I just mean new to social work, a long time ago. I loved being an expert. I loved knowing theory. I loved using it on others to interpret their actions and their meanings for them. But somehow over time, I seem to have learned, maybe, in part by being in therapy and feeling there was a dissonance between my own queer identity, queer life, queer love, and having that interpreted away, analyzed away, that was a kind of discrediting of my own experience. So there's some context that we set out in this letter from the future to ourselves. We imagine we're in 2026 and we've achieved something. We've achieved something that has really contributed as a community, as a practitioner community, as a relational, dialogic, systemic, social constructionist and beyond communities, to improving the safety and quality of life of people who define as genderqueer, trans, gender fluid, non-binary, and more. So how did we get there? What came before? What was the history of how gay people were banned from training as therapists in many institutes, in some modalities in particular, or made just to feel weird, like there was something a bit wrong with them? They'd obviously not gone through developmental things properly. Otherwise, they'd be a normal something or the other, girl, boy, man, woman, the binaries that were set out so clearly in the history of the theories of biology and so on, as though immutable, as though fixed. These are quite persecuting theories. So part of the decolonizing project is depathologizing. taking lived experience out of the diagnostic mental health manuals.
Mm. I was thinking
Oh,
that,
sorry, go on, Liz.
thinking that I remembered when I did my social work training, which was 1985 to 1987. And I remember speaking up and saying, so when are we going to look at issues to do with LGBT people? Although it wasn't that language in those days. And somebody else chipped in and said, oh, we'll do that in psychiatry. When we do psychiatry, they'll talk about that.
So the lesbian and gay communities have somehow freed, with the help of non-queer allies, as well as pressure from within our own communities, freed ourselves from the DSM and the ICD diagnostic manuals. But this thing called gender dysphoria is writ large in fixed, bold lettering on the page that carries massive authority. It's very interesting how these wordings come about that imply, without us even realizing it, that people are, let's say, carrying conditions. And maybe it's because they're autistic as well. And maybe it's because there are other comorbidities, another incredible word that as social constructionists, we're so well placed to deconstruct. So this is really getting to the heart of using our talents and skills and knowledge as social constructionists, as systemic thinkers, to review what's been and what is being recreated through language and practice and legal and educational and so on structures. And the other thing to say, thank you, Alex, for saying, please keep your camera on. And I'm just going to trouble things a little bit and say, if you want to have your camera off, please don't feel bad about it. If you want to just have your toes sticking up at the camera rather than your full frontal face and head and shoulders, that's also fine, because we're all in different spaces and we don't want anybody getting migraines or overload or anything like that. Should we pick a question?
We've thought about some questions that might be useful to drop into the chat for people to kind of reflect on and respond through discussion as a group, or type into the chat if that feels like a better way to contribute. But I guess to extend the conversation and to be part of making the kind of 2026, 2028 or beyond possible for what we're talking about in this letter. And for me, partly the letter is a way of summarizing just a tiny part of the history of depathologization that queer people have already had to live through. And it seems like this kind of rise of pathologizing trans people felt to me like another era of the same themes. And I really didn't want, as a field, for us to go through all of that again. So hopefully the letter provides a way to kind of summarize and get on with it, rather than be in some of the invitations that we have to be in, I don't know, terrible things like debate, and having to talk it through. Just wanting to be able to kind of acknowledge, this is our history, this is our position. Now, how do we go forward with that? So I think one of the first questions, remind me, Gail.
One of the first questions was, let's just ask you for one or two words to just express your reactions to reading a letter from the future to ourselves. And if you don't want to write anything, you want to just make notes for yourself, that's fine. You don't have to go public. You can, yeah.
And people might also want to talk out anything that felt important or maybe was recognized in the letter. What did you feel? What did you experience being recognized by the letter? This theme around relief and appreciation speaks to maybe other people feeling the way that Liz and Gail and Gwyn and I were. Yeah. We've got a hand up from Dana.
Hi, may I speak without a face, but I have a cartoon there.
Yes, of course.
Thank you so much. I read the letter, and this week, I'll just give you a little context. I am a professor of marriage and family therapy, and I teach my classes disrespectfully, in a way that is really aligned with queer theory, although I identify myself as a heteronormative person, but I think I've been non-normative in all the other areas of my lives. Um, it's hopeful to I came here because I wanted some hope, because I feel that my experience teaching from this location of disrespect, if you want to say, is it's not it's painful to me. So last night I just got an email from one of my students, and I get tons of emails, and I don't know, I think I'll just make a collection of them for the future. But I was asked by a student to change my language when I'm speaking about theory. The student says that I'm too strong, and therefore this is not a good place to be. It's very threatening to their ideas and the ideas that they have in terms of DSM or whatever else they've been using have helped people. And although I want to feel hopeful that we have people deconstructing those ideas, I feel a little unease because I hope in 5 years I'm able to be more hopeful. So I just wanted to share a little bit of that. I don't know. I have many questions of why that is. I'm hoping that many of you who have paved the way in the past can give me a little infusion of hope that things will change. But at this point, I'm not too hopeful. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. I think a lot of us are looking for hope at the moment, that things can feel quite bleak, in terms of thinking about how queer people are understood within psychotherapy. And of course, there's always that other story, isn't there, that, you know, queer people are doing very well and creating their own methods of psychotherapy and our own spaces. So yeah, thank you. Joanne, you had your hand up as well. I don't know, would it be useful to talk now and then we'll do another question?
Yeah, can I talk now? Yeah. Yeah, I guess sad and angry because we're all people, and that's it. And I think with colonialism, we're always putting ourselves into little silos. So I'm black and I'm a woman. You know, you might be a ginger, you're male. Why can't we just think about us just being people? I think, you know, we're all different, and that's a great thing. but so it makes me sad. But I think you should always have hope. There should always be hope, because I think without hope we don't have anything really. Yeah, and angry because there has to be forums like this. Great that there are forums like this, but it shouldn't have to be that way, because I just think that, you know, there's so much in life to kind of understand. And then when your identity, your sexuality, your gender, anything about you is questioned, it automatically makes you other. And I think that is just so destroying and limiting in what we can be together if we just recognize that we're just all people, and that's okay. So a bit of both. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but anyway.
Thank you. And moving between that kind of lens of people and lived experience, we're always balancing that kind of where we might be able to think about some kind of universality or deeper connection, and something that reflects the very different lived experiences people have based on how they're seen, how they're othered, how they live.
I guess I wasn't thinking about universality. I was just thinking about, I think we really need to move into decolonialism, because I think if we recognize that everything is built up through colonialism, while we have all these cartographies to begin with, you know, if we just still inhabit colonialism, we're still going to try to change things, but we're still kind of othering. We might be making ourselves more known in whatever way we want to be known, but it's like we have to fight to do something else. We have to fight against the normativity of things, when actually everyone is normal, but we're not considered that way for whatever reason. I don't know if that makes sense, but I don't want to make it like a simple argument about universality. I mean about actually understanding that, you know, we are what makes our identity. Who we say we are, and that's that, and that shouldn't be a problem. I'm not saying it isn't, but I'm just saying, you know, I see a time, maybe not in 2050, maybe in the year 3000, where these things, you know, people growing up, if we still have a planet by that time anyway, but you know, growing up, that it'll be different. You know, that things that we're talking about today, we won't be talking about, because it's not an issue. So it's not about a reversal, it's about a real deep understanding of and accepting we are all people to begin with.
Thank you for that clarification. I really get the humanizing way you're using the word people. Patience, another hand.
I think what Joanne said really resonated with me, because I imagine when I read that letter, there was such a human voice in it, and there was a simplicity to what was envisioned for the future, but how impossible it might feel in the present, but how we got there. And it reminded me about how, you know, at times difference is sometimes seen as a separation from the other, but in the same way that our fingers are still connected to our hand. They're all different, the thumb, the index, but we're all part of the same body. And it just strikes me as very painful in how we treat those who look very different or seem to be moving away from what we see as normal.
Thank you. Gail, some more questions?
So, have you shared the letter with anybody? And if so, who? Who would you like to share it with? And yeah, who would you like to share it with? And how do you go about sharing something like this? Does it matter just of forwarding the link? Makes me also wonder, I suppose, that question about what are the repercussions for you as a person in the world in terms of sharing things. I remember lending a book when I was a teenager, some lesbian novel. I think it was The Well of Loneliness, which was probably about the only lesbian novel at the time, and from 100 years before. And I lent it to a friend at school, and it came back covered in brown paper, as though maybe she hadn't wanted anybody to see, you know, any of her friends or family to see this, you know, those words. And just sort of thinking, you know, that actually there are repercussions for all of us as allies or accomplices, and taking a stance. Because it's a very binary conversation that goes on. Very divisive conversation that goes on a lot of the time around gender identity. So any thoughts on, and then Mary's put an interesting point in, which we'll come to in a moment. But who have you shared it with? Would you share it? Do you think it needs sharing or developing? You know, there's lots of things you could do with it. Liz, you had some ideas when we spoke yesterday about, was it
What
you,
about where it was shared?
about how it could be shared and used? Somebody I spoke to.
Yeah. I mean, I talked about having shared it with a friend of mine who's non-binary and who's training to be a systemic psychotherapist at the moment. And I think they shared it with their student cohort. And that was also in response to the article that's been recently in Context that you spoke about at the beginning, as a sort of foil for it. And I think one of the things is that these things are so important to write, but unless they get shared, then they somehow don't have a life. They need to really get out there and create conversations.
I thought it might have been you, but maybe it was somebody else who were talking about how it could be performed.
No, I don't think that was me.
Was it you, Amanda?
I don't think it was me.
Okay,
No?
so I've either been dreaming.
So there's been even more conversations.
Yeah, but just imagining how it could be used in a way where people, maybe it was Shoshana in San Francisco at CIIS. She was saying, we were discussing this yesterday, and she was saying it's the kind of thing that might lend itself to a graphic novel or to something that could be performed, that people can rewrite the text of it, the history, the future, the context, the quotes. And so there's sort of bigger questions about how documents can have life of their own. She was planning to use it with her students on the expressive arts courses.
Mm.
Yeah, I could really envision people rewriting the context bit for their own context. You know, we've taken little slithers of the history of psychotherapy's pathologization of LGBT and queer people, you know, from America and the UK, but each other context is going to have its own history. And there might be parts of the context that feel important to kind of pull and not pull. And also that kind of idea of putting your own name to something feels really important. I know we had discussions about whether we should name ourselves as the authors or not, and just leave it out there as something beyond us. And it reminded me of the when at one of the meetings of the American, I think, Psychiatric Society, when gay people were giving evidence to say that their lives were not pathologies or their lives were not psychiatric diagnoses, many of the therapists presented with bags on their heads to anonymize themselves, to be able to speak and, of course, be recognizable to those who knew them, but also to maintain a sense of a more generalist or a more kind of global sense of input. And I think that feels really important in this, that people can kind of rewrite it, own it, show it in different places.
Sally, Sally and Dan have put, maybe we could pass the letter on to schools or institutes where we were trained or graduated. And I think training courses is really important, whatever the profession, because some of the feedback from any students from oppressed communities is quite consistent, certainly within the UK, that people who are Black, global majority, have a particular religion that isn't the dominant religion of the country, Jewish or Muslim or Hindu, Sikh, for example, who are one kind of queer or another, however people are defining, who carry disabilities of one sort or another, people who are neurodiverse, and there may be many other things, older or younger, they all experience quite consistently struggles with how their identity and their life experience is present or not present in the program, either present in a pathologized textbook form or absent in terms of mention. And these are very difficult things to know how to incorporate. And it makes me think that dialogical niceness is not enough. You know, the liberal kind of warmth, welcoming the individual is not enough, because it doesn't appreciate the histories of those community members and their communities and what they deal with in the street on the way to and from their training course. Glenda.
When you were talking about how can this be performed, I was thinking of performance in a more almost not quite literal, but straightforward way, because I was thinking about sharing this with a number of my colleagues as a way of affirming them that they're already doing some of those things in 2026 now. And so they've started that going and rolling. And to me, I thought this was actually something quite exciting for us to begin to look at that, to look at what made that possible, and to begin to think about how to grow that, or how to maybe even include others in these different projects, these different LGBT. So just as one example, I have a much younger colleague of mine with an even younger colleague of his, and they have been running in a public hospital, medical hospital context, a project called the Rainbow of Life with LGBTQ plus young people, where they've been, sort of looking at the intersection of their different sexuality and gender identities, and also their medical health conditions. And they've been running these groups and doing a lot of this kind of listening groups, telling stories, and then sharing the stories of those groups with other people, so that now that same group project has also moved into an adult mental health context and a learning disabilities context, and their Rainbow of Life groups starting to run there. So I was thinking these are, small on the ground projects, but actually they're beginning to perform that 2026. And I think that is very exciting to me, because it is pointing to hope and pointing to possibility.
I think that's really an important point, because a lot of this isn't this letter from the future to ourselves isn't intended as some kind of groundbreaking thing. It's an echo of what's already happening. It's an echo of what many people are already involved with, but it's also a response to some slide back and nervousness, particularly in the UK. I don't know if it's happening elsewhere, but as some of you will have read, the United Kingdom Council for Psychotherapy has issued guidance that something called gender critical therapy is okay, where rather than be affirming of people's own way of self-defining, they would rather take them on an exploratory journey to check whether they're really, really trans. And that's so tiresome for people. It's much more than that as well in terms of difficulty. But you know, it's only half a step away from those terrible things that people say when, you know, you're a lesbian as a youngster or even at any age, and people say, but are you just sure you just haven't found the right man yet? You haven't had good enough sex. In fact, one of the psychoanalytic institutes in London asked that at an interview of an applicant in the 1880s to, was it 90s, to a lesbian applicant, that whether she'd actually had not just a heterosexual sexual relationship, but whether she'd had full penetrative sex as part of trying to evidence whether I don't know what, but it's that kind of, you know, so what we're doing within our professional body in the UK of the UKCP is pretty much asking that question, but have they actually tried full penetrative sex with somebody of the opposite gender?
And that, I think, whenever you're asking why someone is trans or why someone is gay, like for instance, are they gay because they haven't had the right sex with a man yet? I think that's one of the times that I alert to kind of danger. And we always need to walk away from the question of why is someone trans or why is someone gay or lesbian or bi or any other identity, or, you know, identities that we might not have words for yet. And I position myself in how are you trans? How does your transness, you know, show? How does it work for you? What does it mean for you? And moving away from why questions feels really important in that kind of repositioning.
And Bill's raising a question about whether it would be useful with medics. Now, I think in a way, again, part of our social constructionist theoretical framework is seeing theoretical propositions, theories as coming out of, as arising out of culture, time, place, and that they don't just exist, but within a medical model, sometimes the preoccupation is on causality. And, you know, why are people? And the moment also, just to extend on Amanda's point, the moment one starts asking why are people XXX, whatever they are, autistic, gay, whatever, trans, then one's actually going to pour money into research to find the cause and find the cure. And that means to eradicate pre-birth an entire population, entire section of the population. Most of the research money going into autism certainly has been going into cause and cure research, which will inevitably result, or intends to, in the result, or a result in the eradication of autistic peoples, neurodiverse peoples. So we need to be very careful with this why question. It rises out of early scientific curiosity about, it's back to the aboutness position, and yeah, which we're all schooled in to a degree, and then learn to resist and critique. But I don't know if other people have reactions to some of these points. And on the other hand, here's a question. What do you think your gifts are as an ally, as an accomplice, or whatever word you want to use? And by ally or accomplice, that could mean a a trans ally, somebody who's cisgender, meaning you identify with your birth gender, birth sex, and so you want to be an ally towards trans and non-binary people, but it could also be that you're a trans ally in the sense of you are a trans person, where trans is an adjective in a sense. So you're an ally or accomplice to help cisgender people become more kind of trans aware. But that we always have to be careful with those sorts of things. We don't want to put the burden of responsibility on those whose lives are negatively affected and trying to support the change in others. So what do you think your gifts are, or what, your commitment, your strengths, your wishes?
I've just put a link in the chat to a piece of research that's part of the Access Care project, which is at King's College London, that I'm part of. And it's a paper that was published in the British Medical Journal, which is about people's experience as LGBTQIA plus people, their experience of receiving medical care. Because there is work that's going on which is actually highlighting these things. And we're also looking at how we create that sort of impact as well. So how, having done that sort of research, you then, and we produce guidance for healthcare staff on how to talk to patients, how to talk to clients. So there's work going on, but it's also about how to ensure that there's some impact of that it actually goes to those people who need it, rather than those who already know something about it. Because those people for whom it's important will already know about it, but it's everybody else. And there are a number of papers. There are about 8 papers altogether.
I'd like to say something, but sorry, Liz, are you finished? Can I say something?
Go ahead.
Is that okay? I don't know where the hand function is. I can't find it on my screen. I'm trying to ask deeper. I have a lot of different thoughts. Like when I read this, we need articles like this, the one that Liz just shared with us. But I think we need. What I liked about the letter, what I got excited about was the very real ways in which you were centering trans people there and how they can influence and inform the work. Because what I find is that we're having to straddle being defensive against policies and legislations and transphobic pieces in Canada that are getting passed, and provinces are passing really, really harmful policies. So how do we be strategic? How do we center trans experiences? And how do we move? As a therapist, I don't think that we still have access to good professional development that goes beyond what the pronoun is. What does a pronoun mean? Why do you ask about a pronoun? What does LGBT mean? Like, I want us to go beyond that. And that's what I feel is really missing. Like, those of us want to do good work and we want to push ourselves. We don't have access to it. And even this, I'm really looking forward to reading this article that Liz shared, but what if we instead broke down what it meant to work with lesbians, with queer people, with gay men, I think we used to have that, and we've moved away from that, where I think too much of the discourse now is putting LGBTQ people together. And I also don't think we should be doing that. Their needs and issues are very, very different. So I just think we need to push and look for more depth. And I don't think we have that right now. So one of my research questions has been, what does it mean to go beyond affirming care? What does that look like? That's the last model, but what else would we like to have in place? So I'm trying to ask different questions to deepen and broaden the work. That's, I think, what maybe if I would call that a gift that I'm trying to bring to this work.
I like that, Mira, and it makes me think about beyond therapy, really, outside of the consulting room, because of course when we invite people to the office, they come into our space unless we're working online, in which case we're in, I don't know who owns the space. But how can, you know, the Autism and Systemic Practice Conference, and Mary's here, which we're in the organising committee for, we make sure that the conferences, which are primarily for professionals, have lots of interesting speakers, and that nearly half of them are trans. Sorry, not trans, autistic or neurodiverse in some way. And there's perhaps, there's something about elevating the voices of ordinary people, members of the public, as well as making sure that therapists, practitioners, professionals, colleagues, whatever the word is, can also come out and be able to speak to their own lived experience. In a letter a colleague was writing yesterday, they said, although I'm not a member of that community, I speak as a Black working class woman. And there's something about just needing to out some things. Not saying this is my identity full stop, but saying I'm speaking from these places. And to value that. Otherwise, we fall into the liberal humanist notion that we're all the same under the skin, which we are as well. But there are these massive differences too that need valuing, elevating.
Mira, I was connecting with what you're saying because I'm kind of really grumpy that we're having to sort of go back and do some kind of defense of our work, or this kind of debate at the moment around gender critical versus affirmative therapy, because I was really interested in the bit where we moved beyond affirmative, because affirmative, still carries so much in terms of kind of shaping lives around normativity and shaping what's possible out of what is. And that doesn't feel often as kind of like where we need to be theoretically. So I really hear like what is the kind of toolbox that we need to kind of develop more theory that drives us in practice. Because I do think, once you're on board with kind of pronouns and affirmative practice, then what next? Maybe is what I'm hearing a bit of what you're saying. And someone's put some good, put some references. Mm-hmm.
And maybe fitting with that, we had an idea about what kind of trans/queer social constructionist and systemic resources do we need to develop, and how are they kept? Who keeps them, who develops them? But sometimes I think in this online world, we can think of virtual libraries, cafes, where there are these resources as well. What kind of trans or queer social constructionist systemic resources do we need to develop so they might count as knowledge? Mary.
Hi, sorry, my camera's not working properly, by the way, so I've given up. I don't know how this fits in the conversation, but I was thinking about the question earlier about the gifts or what we bring, and I just still feel, and it relates to my comment earlier in the chat bit. I think sometimes though, with particularly with young people, we need to be able to sit with their pain as well as they try and identify who they are and how they fit within themselves, as well as how they fit within a society that's not kind to them whilst they're trying to work out who they are. And I suppose that's one of the things we bring as systemic therapists. I'm thinking about some of the young people I've worked with in CAMS, and that just the sheer pain that they have and the damage they do to their bodies, and boys who still have periods, and all of the biological factors that they're managing as well. So I suppose it's how do we capture all of that alongside everything else when we work to support people. Sorry, I've made everybody go quiet now.
People might want to jump off from what Mary's saying, or come back to that question around kind of gifts, or the question around what resources and how we develop resources.
Or maybe even your own question that you would like raised here this evening.
I'm thinking about training, you know, and how this needs to be a part of training. I'm not hesitant in saying that, but I'm just, again, I just come back to my point, we're all people, and you know, some sections of the communities just go through so much more pain. But how can we start to change this? How can agendas change, like in education and things like that? Because I think we've got family therapists coming through that they won't have really done anything on this. Fair enough, Amanda always does a session on most courses, I think, but it's not just about Amanda speaking on most courses, it's about everyone taking responsibility. And that's what I'm struggling with. I don't have a solution, but everyone should be speaking for everyone else. So yes, education is a start, but I'm thinking, what more? How can we expand that and do something that speaks into the future that is going to be sustained in the future, if that makes sense?
And sustaining means sustaining ourselves as allies, as accomplices. And that's hard as well, because you could be a lone practitioner, you could be a trans practitioner, you can be a trans ally, and possibly the only person in that organization. And sometimes that throws a tutor and a student together as well, because they have something in common that maybe the rest of the group, the rest of the organization doesn't get. And I think that's why sometimes it's very important to understand that boundaries, normal professional boundaries, are sometimes restricting of force emerging, people being able to develop camaraderie, because they have shared experience. It could be between somebody who's got, between people with different positions in an organization. And that's another area of what might be considered radical, but are we allowed to? But everybody's a member of different communities. And so, you know, working in the pink practice, which is a lesbian and gay systemic social constructionist therapy practice, we're all community members. Anybody who's lesbian or gay or trans is a community member, perhaps first and foremost, over being a therapist. And those things are important to understand, that we're not just speaking from a position of politics or philosophical position. We're speaking out as community members. And that's valid for that to guide the theory and the practice and the ethics. So Sally or Dan or both simultaneously have written, it's difficult to pursue countercultural ideas while maintaining professional positions. It's a tightrope. It is. And so then, you know, it's back to that thing of what is a professional position. Now, it can be a position of care, that not wanting to burden people and say something too much about oneself. But I don't know if you had something particular in mind that you wanted to share. Don't feel obliged to if it's not the right moment. They're thinking. Somebody else? Dana agrees. I don't know if I said your name correctly, Dana.
I was going to come back to that point about, yes, I sort of end up being I feel sometimes like the token queer that gets dragged out on all the training courses. And there's a real dilemma about that in terms of wanting that content to be there, wanting that content to be respected and sort of held with importance, but at the same time knowing that often that conversation is really limited to one piece, and how, you know, I feel the disappointment of the LGBT students and this kind of that it's not really good enough, and that I'm part of that offer that never feels good enough to be discussed once, to have your life relevant in like a special section of the training. Yes, it's not in psychiatry where it was when Liz was talking about training, but it's still almost in, you know, it still feels like it's structured around the paraphilias in the DSM or something. It's still other.
Sally and Dan.
We wrote that comment with the idea that you were mentioning earlier about outside of therapy, regular people from our worlds, that sometimes to operate in our professional bubble and to try to make change from within, it can be part of the solution, but it may require us stepping outside and doing something more revolutionary and something that would get us into serious trouble with our professional positions. And that, I think, scares people. And there's kind of, we want it both ways. We want to push the agendas of change, but we still want to be acceptable to all the people that we're affiliated with. So that's where the tightrope thing is. You know, how can I be significantly changing things while still not being thrown out of the conversations or the professions of which I have invested?
Mm.
I think for those that are othered in society, always stepping out, there's always the sense that you have to be braver, you're doing something, and it shouldn't feel that way. But it is. And I guess in my process of trying to decolonize my many selves, it's like, you know, that's what colonialism has done to us all. But how can we change that? So in a way, going back to Amanda's question, because that's how I feel. I don't know you, Amanda, but that's how I feel positioned, because he always feels when I hear your name mentioned on courses and things like that, oh, she's coming to talk about this. So it's like, well, so you're the conduit for all those knowledges, and you're not, you know, right. but it becomes that way, and how can that be perturbed? How, like I say, on courses, how can that be integral? Like, how can, you know, cultures be integral? The social graces talk about race, but we shouldn't be talking about this. So we do need to find decolonized language that has meaning, that includes us, but is inclusive of everybody. And I don't mean it in like a universal way, but I'm just kind of thinking about the broader and the wider, because when I see the future in the year 3000, I want to know that whatever children, adults are out there in the world, that they aren't having to go through these same things. They can go to school, they can be different, they can just be accepted. So I'm just thinking, if we continue to kind of inhabit and do things within the colonial way of doing things, like, yes, it's important to get that message out there, but how is it important to get that message out there? Should there be a group of people, you know, should you come with trans, non-binary, whatever? I don't know, but there's something about actually making it integral to all of our lives. so that it does more than it just feeling like it's one person's labour speaking on behalf of, when none of us want to do that, but we still feel we need to do something to change things.
Thank you, Joanne. And Terry has written something that in a way represents quite a different position. I think, unless I've, my scan read Terry, and I know we're nearly out of time, so it's a bit tricky to comment right now, but I think, yeah, I'm not sure that I fully understood whether you're saying it's very important for people with gender dysphoria to have their pain and comorbidities understood and worked with, or whether you're saying that was something you took exception to. Do you want to just unmute yourself and say?
Yeah, hi. And I've been thinking about it, so I'm sorry if it's inappropriate, because it felt like I was taking a risk to share it. I was just quite shocked that the way that it's worded, and the
letter you got back
the
from
letter
people,
that
or a
I
letter
got
from
back.
the future? Oh, I see. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that I sent your letter out to a professional group, and that was the response I got back, and I was just like, crikey, how do I feel like I need to say something in response to it, but I was really struggling to kind of find, how do I help something shift, because I just felt that was it was just an interesting position for that person to take.
There are a lot of,
I don't know what else to say.
It's so good of you and brave of you to raise this, and this is a problem for most people, because a lot of maybe saying anti-trans is too inflammatory, but a lot of people who don't understand the lived experience of people who are trans or non-binary and so on, think that there's a common sense approach to all of this, and that it is a medical problem and needs to be treated as a psychiatric problem. And it's very hard. I mean, one of the challenges for social constructionists is understanding that we're coming out of different ideologies and speaking across languages and values. So the first thing, I suppose, is to try and understand the ideology of the person speaking, and whether they're in the grip of medical language and prefer that position. But for me, the shorthand response to all of this, it's that heading, nothing about us without us. And if that's the value starting point, then all theories have to be interrogated through that lens. Who's written the theory? Whose values are in play here?
And I've just spent the day doing the National Autistic Training Programme by Anna Freud. And it's co-produced by autistic young people and adults. And I was just thinking, how wouldn't it be great if something like that could happen, that actually we can actually start to really put the voices of the people that have the experience at the forefront of people understanding what's happening and what people's positions are.
You're all welcome to be in touch, to continue this conversation one way or another, because I know you'll have to go. Please consider writing for Murmurations, which is at murmurations.cloud. It's a journal that would be very interested in papers from any of you. And if you want to be in touch about anything to do with queer matters, let's put it all under some big umbrella at the moment, then please get in touch with us through info@pinkpractice.co.uk. If you want to speak to Liz, we'll pass on emails to her, and I'll just put that in the chat. And thank you, Taos, for this opportunity of being, in a sense, trans supportive, queer supportive and affirmative, and hosting this space. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you so much to you, Gail, Amanda, and Liz, and everyone who joined us today for this conversation. It is recorded, so the recording will be available in the Taos Institute online community, the comments. And so I will post some of the resources as well that have been shared in the comments section of that recording, and you can continue. We encourage you, invite you to continue the conversation, stay in touch with each other through the comments. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. And
Thank
Terry, get in touch about the autism conference as well.